Hello and welcome back to the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out His teachings. This is Dakota Moody, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Round. Michael, how are you today?
Doing pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Sir. A little bit, we talked a lot about the leaves before. I'm starting to see more and more on the ground instead of on the trees, which is slightly disappointing. We talk a lot about the leaves changing, and it lasts for like 2 weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. Did you have a frost this morning?
I did not, but it was very cold this morning. It was in the I think when my truck said it was 36, it beeped at me to give me the low temperature warning. What were you like up there in Tennessee this morning?
25.
25.
Yeah.
Man,
So
that'll do it.
We had a frost, and it's supposed to be pretty chilly like that. For
a
the
few
next little
days.
while.
Yeah, for a few days.
So
yeah.
I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too, brother.
And talked to my dad in West Virginia, and they're getting snow. So
I'm
first
sure
day of November.
I'm
First
sure
day
they
of
are.
November, and they're getting the snow. Of course, I don't know. I doubt it was going to accumulate to anything, but still, it's a little bit different in the wild and wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. Very different up there in West Virginia. And it's I would say it's not going to accumulate, but I mean, just the fact that there is snow flurries and
Mhm.
on the first day of November is quite something
Yeah,
up there
yeah.
in West
Well,
Virginia.
they get snow well into March and April
Mm,
sometimes. So yeah,
mm,
it's a long winter up there. It can be. I remember when I was at OVU, we were on the Ohio River, Parkersburg is, and there would be inevitably each winter a 2 week stretch where it didn't reach above 20.
mm.
Uh, yeah, and it was
Phew.
rough. I just
Yeah.
different. And OVU, the school, it was on a hill, and the space between the buildings, it was kind of like a wind tunnel.
Oh no.
Um, you had to walk, 30 yards across away where a fountain is, and it was a wind tunnel, and it was freezing. It was cold.
Mm. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing my first snow in a few years out here, and since we moved back from Texas, though. But I will say one of the biggest snows I've ever seen in my life was whenever I was out in Arkansas. They just had some random
Yep.
blizzard whenever I was finishing up at Harding. Me and Anna were living together in our first year of marriage, and we were able to build um, snowmen outside of our
Yeah.
apartments. Very rare indeed.
See, the problem is, though, in the upstate, you're below 85.
Yeah.
So that makes a big difference, above and below 85. So I doubt you'll get snow. And if you do, it'll be a lot less than people up toward TR and other places in northern South Carolina.
That's right. Well, I may just have to go visit my parents up in North Carolina and hopefully not get trapped up there, if
Yes.
that's the case. That's
Yeah.
why we got a four-wheel drive, ladies and gentlemen. Um, so,
Yeah.
so in speaking about seeing things in God's creation, seeing some snow if you're in those sorts of places. I mean, there was a college football game this last week. I think Colorado State and Air Force played, and it was like 6 inches of snow. Seeing all that around us, all the things that are going on, making those observations. Let me ask you, Michael, where have you seen God recently in your life?
Yeah. So I've seen him in the generosity of others.
Mm,
We've had some needs come up, something pretty difficult and challenging, and when people were confronted with that, they were quick to jump in and help. And
mm,
so it's exciting to see people come together, especially on short notice, and try and help other people. And I see God in that. God is a giver, and he certainly wants us to give and be generous toward others. And that's something that he has put in us, that we should be looking for ways to bless other people. And so I see him through the generosity of others.
absolutely. We consider all that we have does truly belong to Him in the first place, and that we are really just stewards
Mm.
of His blessings. We need to be aware of that as we can do those things, and so that's great. As we should, as all Christians should be, blessed givers in that way, and that can be harder for us at different times, but that's something that we should all strive for. So that's excellent that you've been able to see that. And for me, where I've seen God this week, I gave a sermon that was a little bit of a call to action because we needed some things within our congregation. We needed Bible class teachers, needed deacons, things like that, and people responded. People very quickly responded. People very quickly asked what they could do, how they could jump into different things, and I appreciated the heart and the spirit that the people here at the Upstate congregation have had in being receptive towards, oh, things need to happen. Let's get into it. I'm not going to let that fall on somebody else and say, well, somebody will do that. No, they're willing to jump in and ask questions about what can be done. And that makes me very excited to see the life that is here and that God is working in the people, and especially the hearts of the people here.
It's wonderful. And it seems like they've been a blessing to you already in your short time there. And so that's good to hear. So
Absolutely.
as we transition in, we're working through the Sermon on the Mount. We're in
Speaking of the
Matthew 5.
hearts of people.
Yes, exactly. And really we're seeing with Jesus's teachings that God has wanted our heart all along.
Absolutely.
As Jesus has been, reteaching the old law, and not that he's giving some new command altogether, but he is trying to correctly interpret the old law for them. And so in Matthew 5, verse 27, it reads, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." When we first read that, Dakota, what are some observations that you have on Jesus' teaching on adultery and lust?
Well, again, we see the common theme of Jesus, as you've already mentioned, having to kind of reteach something, give the correct interpretation of it, because a lot of times people will say, especially as it regards things regarding sexuality, well, how far is how far is the line? Where can I go? Where's the limit to what I can do? And if they read the law as just, well, you shall not commit adultery, well, a lot of times common ideas on that is just, okay, are you having relations with somebody outside of marriage? And that is kind of the end of that discussion. Well, that's your limit. But Jesus, as we've already mentioned, is talking about the heart. And if you are looking, thinking, leering about another woman in an inappropriate manner, that means you have committed adultery with her in your heart. Have you had relations with them? Has something gone awry? In that sense, not necessarily, but you've already started on that path. And like the anger and violence we've talked about at other times, where people have committed violence against somebody in their heart first, if you again do not hold this lustfulness within your heart first, then adulterous behavior will not follow. And so
Mm.
again, I think this is Jesus really emphasizing where's the hearts of the listeners who are there? What are the hearts of the people who are following this? Is it just to try to avoid a legal line, or are they truly trying to avoid the lustfulness that exists so often?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good point. And what Jesus is trying to do is trying to get their hearts to be pure. And I think about what James says about, pure and undefiled religion. We talk about visiting orphans and widows in their affliction, but also the other part of that is to keep oneself unstained by the world. And I think this is one way in which we can get brought in to the sins of the world. And so we all have a choice. There are things that we see that are outside of our control, especially nowadays with online interactions, online things. There will be things that will pop up on your internet browser that you didn't have control over, whether it's an ad or somebody else's post or whatever, or someone you see on the street or whatever it is. You have a choice. Once you see something catches your eye, are you going to continue to look? Are you going to continue to think about that? Or are you going to turn your attention somewhere else? And so we've got to make the right choice in that. And, I don't think Jesus is teaching that you can't ever see anything the least bit off, because like I said, there are just some things that come on our path that we can't control. But what are we choosing to see? What are we choosing to focus on and think about? And what are we choosing to let in our heart? And we need to be mindful of that.
As you could potentially say, what are we setting our minds on? In that extent,
Absolutely.
right? Absolutely. And I think this is important when we talk about this context, because he's not talking about literally chopping off body parts here. What he's referring to is, don't allow these thoughts to fester, set within you. Don't allow your eyes to linger. Don't let your thoughts linger on these particular things, because once you, as you say, you have that choice whenever that lustful intent begins in your mind, will you stop it there, or will you allow it to sit and fester within you until you have fully turned away from God, or that you have
Yeah.
sinned in such a way that is irrevocable?
Well, and while you say it's not literal, I agree with you. But his point is trying to show us the gravity of the situation. That it
Absolutely.
would be better that you went into heaven lame than not go into heaven at all.
Yeah.
And so we should be mindful of the importance of this. This is not just kind of something that we chuckle about in the locker room, and this is serious.
Mhm.
Something we should take seriously and guard our minds and our hearts, and what we allow into our mind. Any other thoughts on this passage, Dakota?
Well, I think you kind of hit it there at the end, is that, the thing that we got to realize is the consequences for these sins are dire. In sexual sin, Paul talks about sexual sin is the only sin that is within a person. The rest of the sins you commit outside of the person. The sexual sin is inside the person. And I think he really emphasized that in the point there. I think of all sins, well, this is one of the ones that can so easily cause us to separate ourselves from God very quickly, in what sexual sin does within us. And so we need to take it very seriously in all that it is. And that means we have to cut it off at the source. Maybe not actually cut off our body parts, but cut off whatever temptations or things that are there, that could lead us away from this, because Jesus is very stark about the reality of what these things can cause us to have as our end result, which is not being eternally with him.
Yeah, and that's a good point to mention, and that really transitions well actually into what I'm reading. I know you're kind of giving your last thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
well, our last segment, what have you been reading? The book that we have been reading together, actually Dakota's been reading this too, so he might share stuff about this later. Is
A different version of it, though, is
yeah,
because there's apparently 15,000 versions of this book.
the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the only reason I transitioned so abruptly to that is he's talking about in the beginning of that how we need to focus on the inside before we can be concerned with the outside results, the things that take place. And he said on page 51 of my edition, the inside out approach says that private victories precede public victories, that making and keeping promises to ourselves precedes making and keeping promises to others. It says it is futile to put personality ahead of character, to try to improve relationships with others before improving ourselves. And like speaking to talking about lust, maybe we make a commitment to ourselves to each time we see something that someone we could potentially lust over, we redirect our attention, we redirect our mind, and those kinds of victories and promises that we make and keep to ourselves, that will precede the public victories. We have to be people of discipline and people of character and integrity before we can achieve great results. If we try and do the results first, we'll end up being a building without a good foundation, and that will catch up to us. And so that's what I've gotten from that book to begin with, is just how important it is to focus on the inside. And this is something that's very biblical, that like what Jesus is talking about. Be concerned with the quality and health of your heart.
Absolutely. It all starts inside. It all starts from that, what is within a person, because what is without can be changed and shaped at different situations, but what is truly within a person will always show out at some point. And I think that's
Very
what
good point.
his emphasis is there, and it should be the emphasis in the Christian life as well, regardless of what veneer we put on ourselves while we're at church. Um, what is within you is what actually matters. Because I often see where the priority is what's on the outside when we're at church, because we can't have people possibly think that we are sinful, even though we know that we're all sinful and fallen people, and that we need the help of others in that way.
Yeah,
And
no,
and
that's true.
and that works with what I'm going to be talking about today, which is another book that is not faith-based in any way, shape, or form. We opened this series with me talking about a Harry Potter book, and I will continue on with this in this way. To the last two books I'm reading, I've been reading audio-wise, because I have been reading the 7 Habits with Michael, and there's some other books I finished, and I'm about to start some more. So next week I'll have some of those prepared for this discussion. But I've also been going back through the Harry Potter books, and I most recently finished trying to remember the name of the books now because I'm in Half-Blood Prince now. The last one was Order of the Phoenix. Order of the Phoenix, that's what I'm looking for. And in the Order of the Phoenix, of course, Harry is made out to be a liar because he believes that he who shall not be named Lord Voldemort has returned because he saw it with his own two eyes. But there are lots of people trying to convince him this is not the case. This is not true because they are scared of what the reality is if Lord Voldemort did actually return.
They don't want it to be true.
They do not want it to be true. So even though they have this eyewitness testimony, they will defame him and persecute him so that way they don't have to face the reality, the possibility that Lord Voldemort has returned. And I think this has some spiritual ramifications to it because if we think about our own lives, there are people, Christ talks about this, who will deny Christ, who will deny God. And they will do this because of what it would mean for them in their lives if he was true, if he is real. And we as Christians, of course, are going to experience persecution at times in our lives. Now, some people manufacture their own persecutions, but I'll leave that alone at certain times. But
that's true.
But we will have experiences where people will see us as narrow-minded Christians who believe in old superstition. But a lot of this is that there is a mountains of evidence for God and his existence, but people will deny it and will maybe even be antagonistic against us for our faith in Christ Jesus, for our faith in God, because what it would mean for them in their lives if God did exist. And as we know, he does, and what that means for them. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. I was going to say John 3:19. I have it almost said 3:16.
That's
John
right.
3:19 says the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. So yeah, they loved the darkness.
They love living in the darkness. As soon as the light gets turned on, as soon as reality hits them, it all changes. And you see this sometimes in the real world when people are kind of on their deathbeds, maybe, and things like that. When the light is being shown through and it's clear, okay, I got to start facing reality. I couldn't remain in the dark anymore. They start to have some real thoughts, some real world conversations with themselves about what that means. And so as Christians, we need to think to ourselves about, hey, people are going to bring me down in this way, but I need to stand firm. Now, once again, I'm not saying that Harry is always the example of the right and perfect person because this is a fictional character in this book series, but there's something to be said for the fact that this character stood his ground, stood by his beliefs in the face of immense persecution to the point where, I mean, if you read the books, I mean, he was being tortured pretty much by the headmaster at the time, Dolores Umbridge, who took over for Dumbledore for a little bit, tortured. But he stood firm in what he believed and what he said. And at the end of the day, he was vindicated. And it's going to be the same for us, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. It will be the same for us. If we are a Christian, if we are a Christ follower, as long as we stand firm to our belief and our confession, it will be the same for us. There will come a day when we are vindicated. It will be a sad day for those who ignored, but it will be a glorious day for us in that way. And so I would say a lesson, you can see these lessons in the world, and there's just another way of seeing those. I'm reading Harry Potter, for goodness sake, and yet I can find this example, but it's something that I think points us to a truth that we can experience in our own lives. We need to stand firm in our belief in God and what that means for us in our lives.
Well, and I think this is probably the blessing and the curse of being ministers is we read everything we read, we're thinking about a sermon illustration.
Everything's an illustration. That's right. There's a coffee cup that I saw. It was like a preacher's coffee cup. It's like, be careful, like warning, anything you say can or will be used in a sermon illustration.
That would be perfect. Yes. Yeah. I need that mug. But yeah, no. And while that's funny, there is a lot of truth in the world and a lot of truth in people's experience. And that's what I like, is when I like hearing studies about psychology and things like that and how they confirm the Bible's teachings. But anything else before we go today?
No, brother, I think that'll do it for today.
So we really thank you for joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from his word, and live out his teaching. Thank you so much for joining us.